Hi there. Welcome to the Amplify Texas ELAR half-day training. We're so excited to have you here to dig into the Amplify Texas curriculum together. Before we get started, let's just take a quick minute to introduce ourselves. If you could share with the other participants your name, your grade level, the number of years you've been teaching, and what you hope your students will gain from the Amplify Texas curriculum. I'll give you all about 5 minutes to share out. Excellent. Now that we've had a chance to get to know each other, I'm going to take a brief second and just introduce myself. My name is Emily Orsi. I'm an Amplify facilitator. I have a master's degree in education from Johns Hopkins University and 8 years of classroom teaching experience, some in the US and some abroad. I've actually taught with the Amplify curriculum in Baltimore City. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so happy that I get to share with you today what makes it so great for you and your students. Before we begin our training session, we wanted to acknowledge that Amplify is deeply committed to supporting teachers and cares about crafting rigorous and engaging learning experiences for students. As you can see here in our purpose statement, we aim to extend your reach, save you time, and enhance your understanding of each student. Amplify provides you with the tools and resources necessary to support all students to thrive academically. We also strive to inspire all students to think deeply, creatively, and for themselves. In Amplify Texas, we aim to support all students in seeing themselves as readers, which means seeing themselves reflected in the curriculum and having access to the content and supports that will make their experience a success. We strive to make our commitment a reality through both the products we develop and the ways we support the educators and students we work with. We have a few norms for our learning today. Participate actively to make sure you're staying engaged in the material that we're learning. Take care of yourself. There's a lot to learn. If you need to take a quick break or rest, do be sure that you do those things. Manage your technology. So make sure that your phone is not pinging you notifications during the training. Make sure that although we'll be on our laptops, that you're staying focused on what we will be looking at today. And finally, what we learn here leaves here. The whole point of our session today is to give you the tools that you'll need to facilitate and implement the Amplify curriculum in your classrooms. Please take a sheet of scratch paper and write parking lot across the top. Record any questions that come up during the session there. Also, if you have a participant notebook, you can follow along with the pages that correspond to the slide that I am working from. If you see the orange box here in the corner of the slide, there will be a number inside that will correspond to the page number that you should be working on in your participant notebook. We're now going to discuss how to access the training resources on the Amplify Texas teacher resource site. I want you to be sure to know how to get there because you'll need to access it throughout the session. On page 3 of your participant notebook, you will find directions on how to get to the training resources we will use. Before you do it on your own, I'm going to model how to get there. Please use the directions in your participant notebook to follow along as I model. Afterwards, you'll be able to do it on your own. First, open an internet browser on your computer. Next, type in my.amplify.com/home. Once you're there, click Login with Amplify. Your username will be Amplify Texas Teacher at tryamplify.net. Your password will be Amplify with a capital A, number with a capital N, and then 1. Once you're logged in, you should be able to access all of the things that we will need for our session today. Now it's your turn to get to the training resources. Use the directions in your participant notebook to guide you in getting to the site. Excellent. To help us identify our session's objectives, I will read these on the slide. As you can see, together we will be learning about the Amplify Texas curriculum. You'll be able to identify 2 to 3 implementation look-fors in the Amplify Texas lesson videos and list 2 to 3 Amplify Texas routines that are new to your teaching practices. We will be learning about the components of the Amplify Texas curriculum and the pedagogy behind the curriculum design. You will also have an opportunity to see these components in action. Here's our agenda for today's session. First, we will discuss the why. Why do we have the Amplify Texas curriculum? Then we'll discuss the design principles, the program design, dive into the Amplify Texas materials, our unit introduction, the lesson components, take a look at the assessments, some unique Amplify Texas units, and additional program components. District schools and teachers have a lot to do. Amplify Texas helps teachers save time by providing instructional materials that contain strong foundational skills, complex texts, deep content, and rigorous tasks to help students meet the rigor of high standards. Amplify Texas is embedded with assessments that will help you inform your instruction. We provide you with a curriculum that is grounded in the science of reading so that you, as the teacher, can add in the art. Now that we understand the why behind Amplify Texas, let's dive into the program's guiding principles. This will show us how the program is designed to meet the needs of students and teachers. In a 1988 research study by Recht and Leslie, there is compelling proof for the importance of background knowledge in reading comprehension. In this study, researchers first determined a group of students' reading ability by analyzing their performance on a standardized reading assessment. Next, they gave students a pre-test read orally by their teacher to assess their level of background knowledge about baseball. Finally, students silently read a passage about baseball and responded to comprehension questions on that test. So as you may be able to predict, students with a high reading ability and also a high knowledge of baseball scored the best on the test. Students with low reading ability and low knowledge of baseball scored low on the test. But the thing that was interesting about this study is that students with low ability but high knowledge about baseball actually scored better on the test than students with high reading ability but low knowledge of baseball. The readers with the low ability but high knowledge had the context to understand what was happening when the passage said, Roberts sacrificed Martin to second. For them, they understood that this meant that Martin was now in a scoring position and Roberts was in the dugout. However, this was not clear to their peers, even if they had a high level of reading ability and were able to decode the text. Their lack of background knowledge actually hindered them. Therefore, one of our goals in Amplify Texas is to build up student background knowledge through texts on a wide variety of topics. In addition, students read multiple texts on one topic throughout a unit, so they build their knowledge on a topic throughout the unit as well. Now that we understand the importance of world knowledge and background knowledge in reading comprehension, let's take a look at how background knowledge and vocabulary play out in a standardized assessment. This is a passage from a 3rd grade standardized test. Just take a moment to read the passage silently to yourself. Keep in mind, you're reading the passage without knowledge of Tier 2 or Tier 3 vocabulary words. This passage probably doesn't make a lot of sense to you. Now, let's say that you did have the background knowledge to understand the domain-specific vocabulary. This is what the passage would now look like to you. Does it make more sense? Yes. As you can see, if you don't have an understanding of the academic vocabulary of this text, this passage is even harder to comprehend. This quick example just shows us how crucial background, both word knowledge and world knowledge, is to a reading comprehension, including on state examinations. Now let's take a look at how Amplify Texas will build this knowledge throughout the years. We're going to see how the curriculum was developed for Amplify Texas using the design principle we were just talking about. In Amplify Texas, in grade 3, students receive 120 minutes of instruction. Students in grades 4 and 5 receive 90 minutes of Amplify Texas instruction. The students in grade 3 receive 120 minutes because there's an additional daily read aloud included in the lessons. Grade 3 is the year that students bridge the gap from learning to read to reading to learn. So these additional read alouds support them in bridging that gap. You'll learn more about the read alouds later in the session. You'll also receive a set of teacher guides to use for each unit of instruction throughout the year. The Amplify Texas knowledge units are strategically sequenced to build that word and world knowledge over the course of the year and also across multiple years. This chart shows all the units taught in grades K through 5. The path in orange shows how literature connections spiral throughout the year. Let's take a closer look. In kindergarten, children are learning about stories, fairy tales, and folk tales. By 2nd grade, they're working on fairy tales and tall tales. In 3rd, classic tales, The Wind in the Willows. In grade 4, poetry, wondrous words. And by grade 5, they're working on an introduction to Shakespeare, A Midsummer Night's Dream. Now let's look at how a science topic would spiral through the grades K to 5. In kindergarten, students do a unit called Taking Care of the Earth. Then History of the Earth in first grade, Cycles in Nature in second grade, Astronomy in third grade, Geology in fourth grade, and Chemical Matter by fifth grade. As you can see, the sequence of the units across the years builds students' background knowledge systematically. As we mentioned, the content-based units are used as a lens for which skill and knowledge instruction are delivered in Amplify, Texas. Each unit you teach may revolve around a science or social studies topic, but the chapters and activities accompanying them include a cross-disciplinary approach to ELA instruction. Let's look at grade 4, unit 4, the American Revolution, Building a Nation. At first glance, you might assume just by looking at the cover of this reader that the unit is about the colonists seeking independence. Although content knowledge is shared with the students, each lesson within the unit keeps an ELA focus. Here are 2 excerpts from the Unit 4 teacher guide. Please read these excerpts to yourself and raise your hand if you can point out an example of Amplify Texas using social studies content as the lens in which it teaches ELA. I'll give you 1 minute to read through now. Please take a minute to share out anything that you found that shows that ELA concepts are being taught through the lens of social studies. Excellent. So as you can see, although science and social studies topics will be the lens, the focus is maintained on ELA skills that students will be learning. So as we mentioned earlier, Amplify Texas in grade 3 is 120 minutes of instruction. Here's just an example of a daily schedule from Mrs. L. She teaches 3rd grade. Her Amplify Texas block is placed first thing in the morning from 8:20 to 10:20. This teacher teaches 4th grade. Remember, in 4th and 5th grade, Amplify Texas is 90 minutes of instruction. This teacher's school is departmentalized, so he is the only literacy teacher for all 4th grade students. You can see the 90 minutes is allotted for Amplify Texas with each class in his daily schedule. Amplify Texas also provides yearly pacing guides. This guide shows when each unit of instruction will occur. This example pacing guide comes from grade 3 but the guides look the same for all grade levels. As you can see here, Unit 1 will be taught during the first 3 weeks of school. Now that we understand how the overall curriculum is designed, let's take a quick look at the materials that you will receive. This video will give you a tour of the Amplify Texas teacher resource site and curriculum materials so that you have a solid understanding of what is available.
Hi there, I wanted to give you a quick tour.
Great. Now that we have an overview of the Amplify Texas Teacher Resources site and your materials, let's take a closer look at one of those materials in particular, the teacher guide. We are going to locate and talk about the following sections in the teacher guide: the contents, the unit introduction, the lesson 1 overview, the pausing point, and the teacher resources. This is just a brief overview of the guide to familiarize you with it. We're going to dive into the lessons in more detail later in the session, so this won't be the only time that you have to understand your teacher guide. The first section is the contents. In an Amplify Texas teacher guide, the contents includes more than page numbers. It's an overview of the content of the unit. The contents provides a quick but informative summary of the lesson components and segments, activities that students will be doing, and the time allocation included in each lesson and the unit as a whole. Throughout our session today, we'll be using the terms lesson components and lesson segments quite often. Lesson components refers to the larger sections of the lesson. For example, this lesson has 3 components: reading, language, and writing. Lesson segments refers to the smaller sections within each lesson component. For example, if we look at the reading lesson component, we see that it has 3 segments: small group reading, lesson wrap-up, and word work. You can easily reference both the lesson components and the segments in the contents section of your teacher guide. Next, we have the unit introduction. Unit introductions are very valuable. They're designed to give you the specific information that's important in teaching the unit. Reading the unit introduction in each teacher guide is a very important part of preparing for each new unit. Here we can see that the unit introduction gives us the big idea of the unit. It's a brief summary that allows you to understand what content students will be learning throughout the unit. Each lesson in a unit begins with a lesson overview. There, you'll find your primary focus objectives of the lesson, as well as the formative assessments that go along with them. The primary focus objectives state the main purpose of each activity and connects it to the standard that it covers. Formative assessments are used to track whether students are mastering the primary focus objectives. Over the course of an entire unit, the primary focus objectives are formatively assessed on multiple occasions, so teachers will have a clear sense of individual student progress before the end of the unit. Also included in the lesson overview is a lesson at a glance and advanced preparation section. The top arrow points to the lesson at a glance. The lesson at a glance outlines the activities for each lesson component, the time, the grouping, and the materials needed. The bottom arrow points to the advanced preparation section. This section summarizes the resources and information necessary for teachers to prepare prior to the lesson. Remember, throughout our session today, we're going to be using the terms components and segments. In addition to in the contents, you can also view lesson components and lesson segments on the lesson at a glance page. As a reminder, the lesson components are the larger sections of the lesson. For example, this lesson has 3 lesson components: core connections, reading, and the take-home material. Lesson segments refer to the smaller sections within each lesson component. After the last lesson in the teacher guide is a pausing point section. Just a note, Unit 1 in Grade 3 does not have pausing point days. They will appear in all later units. Pausing point days contain several days worth of enrichment and remediation instruction for your students. They're opportunities for you as the teacher to provide your individual students with the targeted enrichment and remediation instruction they may need to solidify the skills that they've been taught within the unit. In Grade 3, there are usually two sets of pausing point days worked into the unit. One is usually around Lesson 6, and another is at the end of the unit. In Grades 4 and 5, there are two content assessments included as part of the pausing points. It's optional to give these, but if you choose to, it is suggested that you administer them after the middle and last lessons of the unit. Finally, we have the teacher resources section of your teacher guide. Here, you can find resources to help you teach the unit. It includes answer keys for activity book pages, a glossary, assorted forms and documents to monitor and track your students' progress, and much more. Now that we've covered our program design and the materials that you'll need for instruction, let's dive into preparing for your first unit and lesson of Amplify Texas instruction. For the purposes of our session today, we're going to read the caregiver support letters that can be found on the Amplify Texas teacher resource site. When you're actually teaching in your classroom, we recommend that you read the full unit instruction in your teacher guide, but for time's sake today, we're just going to review the caregiver support letters to get a sense of what your first unit of study is about before you dive in and begin to look at the lessons within the unit. As you can see, these letters provide a nice summary of the unit of study. I'm going to show you how to navigate on the website to get to these caregiver letters. Once you've logged in and selected your grade level, click on the tab for daily instruction. Excuse me. Click on Unit 1. And within the Unit 1 materials, you'll find the caregiver support letter. Click on that. And here you can read the summary of your Unit 1 of instruction. In a moment, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to review the caregiver support letter for Unit 1. As you review the summary, reflect on these guiding questions. What are the 3 most important things students will learn in this unit? And what is one thing you're excited to teach in this unit? I'm going to start the timer now. Excellent. Now that we've had a chance to understand what our first unit of instruction will be about, we're going to take a deeper look at the lesson components. As I mentioned earlier, Amplify Texas instruction is 120 minutes for third grade and 90 minutes for fourth and fifth grade. This is because grade 3 teachers have an additional read aloud lesson most days of instruction. These lesson components are called speaking and listening. In fourth and fifth grade, the teacher will be asked to read a portion of the student readers aloud from time to time. So this information is applicable for you all as well. In grade 3, students are making that transition from learning to read to reading to learn. Therefore, Amplify Texas has an additional lesson component titled Speaking and Listening, where students listen to a read aloud in order to build more background knowledge about a topic before reading a text on the same topic in their student readers. In grade 3, during the speaking and listening lesson component, the teacher will project images like the one pictured here from a digital flipbook while they're reading the text aloud from the teacher guide. Students do not have the text in front of them. There is a read aloud on most days of instruction in grade 3, and this is why Amplify Texas in grade 3 is 120 minutes, whereas it's only 90 in grades 4 and 5. The extra 30 minutes allows for that speaking and listening read aloud. Now, while there's no digital flipbook or daily speaking and listening read aloud in grades 4 and 5, there are times when the teacher will read a text from the student reader aloud, and the students will follow along in their readers. This type of reading delivery method allows the teacher to model fluent reading for the students, as well as support students in their comprehension of the text. So let's take a look at why Amplify Texas employs read alouds throughout their curriculum in grades 3 to 5. This graph shows students' listening and reading comprehension abilities from ages 1 to age 13. It shows that students' listening comprehension is not equivalent to their reading comprehension until age 13. Students' listening comprehension, the orange bars, far outpaces their reading comprehension for many years. Therefore, we can build students' ability to comprehend complex texts, as well as build their background knowledge on the unit topic through read alouds, so utilizing their stronger listening comprehension. This will also help students better comprehend the complex text that they are reading independently in their student readers, since they will have increased background knowledge on those texts by listening and discussing the read alouds. As we discussed earlier, the lesson overview for every lesson contains a list of the primary focus objectives. We're going to watch a model lesson video in a moment. And for this lesson, in the speaking and listening component, the primary focus objective is students will identify the cause and effect relationship related to the change from nomadic Native Americans to Native Americans who settled in one place. This objective is also aligned to a standard. Each objective has students practice a portion of a standard so that by the end of the year, students have mastered all of their grade level standards. Also, at the beginning of each lesson, there's that lesson at a glance document. It provides you with that activity overview, and also it gives you information on student grouping, timing, and materials that you'll be using. We're going to explore 2 model lessons today. First, we're going to look at a sample lesson from grade 3 that includes a speaking and listening read aloud. Then later in the session, we'll examine another lesson to view the reading, writing, and language lesson components. The sample lesson we'll be watching first is from grade 3, Learning from the Land, Native American Regions and Cultures, lesson 1. We're going to watch a short video of the teacher conducting the speaking and listening lesson component. Here, the teacher will conduct a whole group read aloud titled Spreading Through the Continents using the digital flipbook. Later in our session, we'll talk more about how to introduce and discuss text in Amplify Texas, since the routines that are used for text introduction and discussion are the same for the read alouds as when students read text in their student readers. We're now going to watch a video of the teacher presenting the read aloud for the sample lesson. As you watch the video, please take notes on the questions in your participant notebook. The first 3 questions apply to teachers in grades 3 to 5. As we discussed, in grades 4 to 5, students will still experience a read aloud from time to time. But students will have a copy of the text in front of them in their student readers to follow along with while the teacher conducts the read aloud. Therefore, it is important for all teachers to notice how students are supported throughout the read aloud with comprehension questions. And also how the teacher keeps the students engaged during the read aloud. This last question about the materials is for grade 3 teachers only, since the materials you'll see in this video only exist for the grade 3 read alouds. So for grades 3 to 5, what did you notice about the teacher's pacing throughout the read aloud? And how does the pacing contribute to students' comprehension of the read aloud? How does this video demonstrate how students are supported after the read aloud with comprehension questions? And how did the teacher keep students engaged after the read aloud? What else could the teacher have done to engage students? And then for grade 3 teachers, what materials did the teacher use? I'll give you a brief moment to finish writing down your thoughts after watching that video. So now that we understand the speaking and listening lesson component and the strategies to use for the read aloud instructions in grade 4 and 5, let's take a look at the reading lesson component. The speaking and listening and reading lesson components follow a similar format. They begin with introducing the text and then presenting the text and then discussing the text. Both speaking and listening and reading components also contain a word work segment after the reading, and this allows students to practice a key vocabulary word. We're going to dive into each of these lesson segments now through the exploration of another sample lesson. As we've discussed, the lesson overview for every lesson contains those primary focus objectives and the formative assessments that should be used to assess students' mastery towards the primary focus objectives. In a moment, we're going to watch a lesson. For the lesson that we're going to watch, the primary focus objectives are: students will make and confirm predictions about the concluding events of a story. Students will answer questions about a text and explicitly cite the text as the basis for their answers. Students will compare and contrast two characters from Norse mythology and plan a short narrative about one character. And students will categorize words using different spelling patterns for s. These objectives are also aligned to one or more standards. Each objective has students practice a portion of the standards, moving them towards that end of year mastery. Formative assessments for this particular lesson are answering questions and citing evidence from the text on an activity page, and also a journal entry where students will complete a Venn diagram comparing and contrasting characters. So as you can see, they are assessed on one of the reading objectives and the writing objective for this lesson. Also remember, at the beginning of each lesson, there is a lesson at a glance document. This document provides you with the overview of each activity students will complete during the lesson. It also gives you important information on student grouping, timings, and materials. The sample lesson we will watch begins with the reading lesson component. The teacher will introduce the chapter, read the text in a whole group format, and finally complete a wrap-up with students. The second part of this lesson will be a writing lesson component. Students will complete the character comparison and then plan for a later writing piece. Finally, the lesson ends with a language lesson component, where the teacher will introduce the spelling words for the week. Now let's review the first component of our sample lesson and watch it in action. This bar along the bottom of the slide will show you where we are in the sample lesson. You will see this as we discuss each component of the sample lesson. As you can see from the bar at the bottom, the first lesson component will be reading, and the first segment within the reading component is introducing the chapter, then whole group reading, and then the wrap-up segment. Most reading lesson components begin with an introduction. This is in order to activate students' background knowledge and set them up for success in comprehending the text. After the student introduces the text, the students read the text or listen to a read aloud, discuss the text, and finally complete some sort of activity or wrap-up. We're now going to watch the introducing the chapter segment of our model teacher, Ms. Sobek's lesson. Before watching, let's review. while we're watching the introducing the chapter component of the lesson, please take notes in your participant notebook on these guiding questions on the slide. What are 3 ways that the lesson sets students up for success with the chapter? And 2, what do you notice about the teacher's pacing? Fabulous. So before we move on to the next lesson component, let's do a quick check for understanding and reflect on how this lesson component is a little bit different or maybe the same as the instruction in your classroom currently. I'm going to ask you a few questions, and I'd like you to hold up the number of fingers for the correct answer. Teachers should skip the introducing the chapter lesson segment if low on time. So should teachers skip that introducing the chapter portion? Hold up one finger if you think this is true, and hold up two fingers if you think this is false. Right, false. Introducing the chapter lesson segment provides students with really important information in order to scaffold their understanding of a complex text. This is not a section that you would want to skip or omit. Which of the following is not an action that the teacher takes to introduce the chapter? Hold up a finger for if you think 1, previewing important vocabulary, 2, hold up 2 fingers if you think completing a picture walk of each image in the text, 3, hold up 3 fingers if you think making connections to previous knowledge, and hold up 4 fingers if you think setting the purpose for reading. Remember, we're choosing which one is not an action that the teacher takes to introduce the chapter. Make your choice now. Right, 2. Teachers do not need to preview each image in the text. This might actually over scaffold the text for the students and not allow them to make meaning of the complex text on their own and through the class discussions. Remember, introductions are designed to set the stage and set students up for success with the lesson text by reviewing important background knowledge, covering critical content and vocabulary, and setting that purpose for reading. After the teacher introduces the chapter, students then read the text. In Amplify Texas, there are a variety of reading formats that you will encounter in the curriculum. There's whole group reading, partner reading, small group reading, independent reading, and close reading. Let's take a look at these reading lesson types more closely. In whole group reading, the teacher guides students through a reading of the text. The teacher may read portions aloud and then may instruct students to read 1 or 2 pages in partners or independently. We saw the portion of the lesson where the teacher was reading aloud. The key here is that the teacher is guiding students through a reading of the text by having them read short portions of the text and then discussing the reading to enhance their understanding. This lesson type allows the teacher to model fluent reading or support students in their comprehension of smaller chunks of the text. Partner reading occurs throughout grades 3 to 5. Students will work together to read a chapter from their student readers. For a partner reading lesson, you'll pair students to read and discuss the chapter. You might wish to use any or all of the following pairings at different times. You could pair strong readers with readers who need more support. You could pair readers of similar skill levels, English learners with native speakers. But whatever you choose, the way you pair students should change frequently. In partner reading, both students read the first page silently, and then one partner will read that same page aloud. Next, they both read the second page silently, and then the other partner will read that page aloud, and so on. Students can ask their partner for help to sound out or define words if necessary. Students will also complete an activity page with their partners either after or during reading the chapter. You'll call students back together as a class after reading to discuss the chapter and the activity page. In small group reading lessons, you would divide your class into 2 groups. Small group 1 should include students who need extra scaffolding and support in order to read and comprehend the text. You as the teacher will provide instruction to this group using the same procedures as a whole group reading format. In addition, you will provide support as students complete an activity page, either during the reading or afterward. There are a lot of advantages to using this approach with a smaller number of students, including more frequent opportunities for each student to be actively engaged and to respond orally. And this allows you as the teacher to provide immediate corrective feedback and personalized instruction for individual students. Your small group 2 should include the students who are proficient in reading and comprehending the text without that guided teacher support. These students can work as a small group in partners or independently to read the chapter, discuss it with others, and then complete an activity page. Over the course of the year, students may move from one group to the other, depending on your individual students' needs. After reading in the small group format, you would call students together as a class briefly to discuss the story and wrap up the lesson. Because the students in small group 2 complete the activity page without teacher guidance, you should make arrangements to ensure they've completed it correctly. You might choose to collect the pages and correct them individually, provide an answer key for students to check their own or a partner's completed page, or confer with students individually as a group or as a group at a later time. This is not the same as the traditional small group model of rotating small groups that you might be used to, but a strategic grouping where you as the teacher will only meet with one targeted group of students. Independent reading also occurs in grades 3 to 5. In this reading format, students are asked to read a portion of the text independently before discussing with a partner in a small or whole group. The teacher can pull a small group during this time to provide more scaffolded instruction using the whole group reading format. The teacher guide will specify which type of reading students should do in each lesson. However, you may choose to change the reading format if you think students would benefit from one type over the other. In addition to the types we just discussed, the Amplify Texas curriculum includes the practice of close reading. This involves directing students' attention to a deeper meaning of the text. In close reading, students are asked comprehension questions, but are taken beyond and asked questions about vocabulary, syntax, and literary devices as well. In Amplify Texas, teachers will often guide the students back through a text for a second time, asking them to reread portions independently with a partner in a small group, and respond to questions that ask them to think about the text's vocabulary, syntax, and literary devices. Our sample lesson calls for whole group reading. We're going to do a simulation of the whole group reading portion of this lesson now. I would like you all to act as students. As we complete our simulation, please reflect on the guiding questions listed on this slide. How does this lesson component demonstrate the Amplify Texas design principle that states students are exposed to a rich variety of texts and contexts through the curriculum? How does this lesson component build towards student success with the primary focus objective that states students will respond to questions about the text and use text evidence to support their answers? What materials were utilized during this lesson component, and how does the teacher engage students in student reading? I will act as your teacher. Make sure that you're turned to your participant notebooks. In pages 16 and 17, you will have a copy of the text that we will be utilizing. Okay, everyone, we're going to read chapter 5, The Wedding Feast. Turn to the table of contents in your student reader, locate the chapter, and then turn to the first page of the chapter. You're going to read the text that's on pages 48 to 51 to yourselves. I want you to be reading to find the answer to this question. What did Thor, dressed as Freya, do as soon as everyone sat down for the wedding feast? What did Thor, remember he's dressed as Freya, do as soon as everyone sat down for the wedding feast? Go ahead and start reading and show me a thumbs up when you have finished page 51. Okay, I see a few thumbs up. All right, let's come back together. So did we find out what did Thor do as soon as everyone sat down for the wedding feast? Yes, he ate a lot of food and belched loudly. What did Loki tell Thrym was the reason that Freya ate so much? Right, she had been fasting for 8 days, thinking only of marrying Thrym, so she was very hungry. They're doing a good job of keeping the disguise. If you look at the image on page 51 and you see the caption underneath, it says, "I have never seen a woman eat so much or belch so loudly," Thrym exclaimed. Now I want you to read pages 52 and 53 to yourselves to find out what happened when Thrym brought the hammer to Freya at Loki's request. When you're finished reading 53 to 55, put your thumb up. So find out what happened when Thrym brought the hammer to Freya. Now remember, Freya isn't Freya, Freya is Thor. Okay, I'm starting to see a few thumbs up. All right. So, what did Thor, dressed as Freya, do when Thrym brought him the hammer? Yes, Thor burst out of his disguise and shouting, and he threw his hammer all over the place, killing Thrym and all the servants. If you look at the image on page 55, you can see Thor looking angry and bursting forth with his hammer. The caption says, Thor called out in a voice like thunder, "It pleases me greatly." All right, excellent job, everybody. We were modeling that portion of the lesson to show you that whole group reading does not mean that you are reading the entirety of the text aloud with students without stopping. Oftentimes in the whole group format, you're asking students to read sections of the text independently and then pausing to assess their comprehension of what's happened so far and engage in a brief class discussion. This really scaffolds students through reading the text independently and helps them comprehend that complex text. Let's do a quick check for understanding and reflect on this lesson. I want you to hold up one finger for true and two fingers for false. Reading lesson types are strategically ordered in Amplify Texas to promote student comprehension of complex texts. True or false? One or for true, two for false. True. Reading lesson types are strategically ordered to scaffold student comprehension of complex text. Students experience reading in a more supportive setting before they're reading a text independently. A whole group reading format is considered supportive as parts of the text, although they may be read independently, they are scaffolded with those breaks for comprehension questions and discussions. True or false? So one or two. All instructional decisions should be made to promote student mastery towards the primary focus objectives. True. Amplify Texas provides that science of reading, and you add in the art of the teaching. You know your students best, so if you decide to make adjustments to the reading type or something else in the lesson, just be sure that your adjustments are working towards promoting that student mastery of the primary focus objectives. True or false? All engagement techniques that the teacher should use are included in the curriculum. One for true, two for false. False. This is where that art of teaching comes in again. Teachers should and can add in engagement techniques based on their knowledge of their students. Finally, true or false? Teachers should not ask additional scaffolded questions to support student comprehension. One for true, two for false. False. Again, this is where that art of teaching comes in. If your students are struggling with comprehension questions, of course you can add in additional scaffolded questions to help them make meaning. Remember, in Amplify Texas, students making meaning of the text through discussion and written responses is what our goal is. So remember, in the reading section, opportunities for student discussion are provided during and after the reading of a text to aid in that student comprehension. Also, use your teacher discretion to incorporate engagement techniques and enhance that student interaction with the text. So after reading the text, students complete a wrap-up activity, which includes activities that are meant to synthesize and extend their learning. In this lesson component, you'll see the use of the student activity book. As mentioned in the video earlier in the session, each student will receive a student activity book for each unit of instruction. This is a consumable that students will use daily during their lessons. The student activity book contains all of the paper and pencil work that students will complete throughout each unit. It's also where you will find the spelling lists and letters to caregivers to keep them up to speed on what students are learning about in Amplify, Texas. On this slide, we have the student activity book covers for Unit 1 for grades 3, 4, and 5. We're now going to watch the wrap-up segment of this lesson. Before watching, let's review this segment of the lesson. So in the wrap-up, the students are going to fill in a chart for this chapter using details from the chapter and images. They're going to compare and contrast with previously read chapters. It gives you an example, and the students will be talking about the characters, the setting, and the plot. This is activity page 6.1. Students will be completing it independently. While we're watching the video, can you please take notes in your participant notebook around the guiding questions on this slide? How does this show the emphasis that Amplify Texas places on students analyzing text and expressing themselves in writing? And how did the class discussion during the reading help prepare students to complete the activity book pages? Excellent. Now that we've reviewed that section of the lesson, I'm going to ask you to do a quick check for understanding. Hold up one finger if the statement is true and hold up two fingers if the statement is false. True or false? When students have deep discussions about complex texts, they're better able to extend their thinking and learning through writing. One for true, two for false. Oops, and I already clicked it. It is true. In Amplify Texas, students make meaning of the complex text through discussions. They respond to those strategic and scaffolded questions, and then this allows students to synthesize and extend their learning during those wrap-up activities. True or false? The wrap-up segments of the lesson allow students to further make meaning of the lesson texts through writing. One for true, two for false. True. Students are able to synthesize and extend their learning through written response. And that's what we just saw those students doing using their student activity books. I also want to point out that that teacher chose to pull a small group of students to work with to further scaffold them while they completed that activity book page. You all have done some excellent work so far. We're now going to take a 10-minute break. I'm going to begin the music when there are 5 minutes left into the break time. So when the music goes off, we will be ready to start again. All right, welcome back. We're going to dive right back into our lesson components with word work. The word work segment exists in many of the reading lesson components and the speaking and listening lesson components. These are activities where students practice a key vocabulary word. So word knowledge comes from repeated exposure to words in varying contexts. In Amplify, Texas, students learn vocabulary by having multiple encounters with a word across a multi-week domain. The drill and kill approach is no more for vocabulary words in Amplify, Texas. Students hear the words, read the words, and write the words across the course of a unit. Students also participate in word work activities as part of their reading and speaking and listening lesson components. This allows them to have practice with a specific word that they have encountered in the text. We're all going to participate in a sample word work activity. This sample comes from the same lesson as the read aloud video that we watched earlier. Keep in mind, the format for the word work activities is similar across grades 3 to 5. The directions for this activity can also be found in your participant notebook on page 19. With a partner, I want you to walk through the steps as written in the activity. I will review them now. You can follow along with me in your participant notebook. The word work is for nomadic, and this is a section that should take about 5 minutes. In the read aloud, you heard, these prehistoric people were nomadic hunters who traveled in groups. Say the word nomadic with me. Nomadic people are those who move from place to place, often in search of food. Today, there are nomadic people who move from place to place for various reasons. The nomadic people of the desert often rely on camels for transportation. Have you ever learned about nomadic people? Be sure to use the word nomadic when you tell about it. So then as the teacher, you would ask students to share an experience when they've heard about nomadic people. What's the word we've been talking about? What part of speech is the word nomadic? Then you can see they follow up with a drawing activity where students try to imagine nomadic people moving from place to place in search of food. They draw their ideas and then write a sentence beneath their drawing. Make sure they can use the word nomadic in a complete sentence when they share their drawings. So take some time to briefly discuss this with your partner, practice modeling the steps as if you were the teacher and someone else was the student. I'll give you about 4 minutes to do this. All right, let's come back together. Now that we've reviewed what the word work portion of a lesson looks like, let's do a quick check for understanding. Once again, if you could hold up one finger if the statement is true and 2 fingers if the statement is false. True or false? Teachers should preview all the new vocabulary with students in a read aloud text before reading it. False. Amplify Texas is based on research that says that when there are words that need more explanations, students learn them more effectively when they're taught in the context of the text and then reviewed afterwards. Therefore, students encounter most words during the text and then practice with a few keywords afterwards. Amplify Texas will give the definition of words after they've been introduced in the read aloud text in context. True or false? Teachers should not add any engagement techniques to the word work segment of the lesson. 1 for true, 2 for false. False. Again, Amplify Texas gives you the science of reading, but you create that art. We encourage you to add kinesthetic movements and other engagement techniques that will make vocabulary instruction come alive for your students. We've now reviewed all the segments of the Amplify Texas reading lesson component. We now know that it is critical for literacy development that students are exposed to complex, rigorous texts, which is what we do in Amplify Texas. It's equally important that we provide differentiated support for all students, especially those who are not able to decode and/or comprehend these texts. So with that being said, what do we do for students who are not yet able to read the student reader independently? That's our million-dollar question. Amplify Texas has scaffolds built into the curriculum to help students be supported when they struggle to access the text. The first way Amplify Texas supports students is by strategically sequencing the reading formats to promote student comprehension. By looking at the table of contents, we can get a quick glance at the types of readings students will be encountering throughout the unit. In this example, students will encounter partner reading and a read aloud. In this case, students receive scaffolded support from a partner in the partner reading section, and the teacher could also pull a small group at this time. Then students continue to build their background knowledge on the topic through a read aloud, which will prepare them for a more independent reading lesson type later in the unit. In this example, a whole group reading is followed by a partner reading segment. This will allow students to receive scaffolded support from a partner after they have had time to build the reading comprehension with the support of the teacher and the whole class. As you can see, the sequence of these reading formats helps students make meaning of the text through the support of their peers and the teacher. Don't forget, in addition, questions are embedded throughout all reading formats, and that helps students make meaning of text as well. If students are still unable to decode the student reader, Amplify Texas does offer additional supports. First, you can use your teacher discretion to adjust the reading format, but only adjust it for those who are unable to decode the student reader. If the curriculum calls for the independent reading format, but you think there are students who are unable to independently decode the text, you can better support them by having them work with a partner or work in a small group. While students are working in a small group, you would want the other students to continue to read the text independently. There are questions embedded in the Amplify Texas curriculum that are meant to support student comprehension of the text. One additional strategy to support those students who are really struggling with comprehension would be to scaffold those questions. For example, if the question is, what does the author mean when he says he was gone in a flash? You could scaffold that question by first asking, what is a flash? Where have you seen one before? Is a flash quick or slow, etc. Both of these supports will help students who are struggling to comprehend the text. Now, for students who need support decoding the actual words in the text, we will need to fill in their phonics gaps so that those students can decode with automaticity and thus read fluently and accurately. In Amplify Texas, the code road, or when students learn their phonics code, ends in grade 2, and it has a brief review in the first 2 units of grade 3. But if you have students who are unable to decode the words in the text independently, you'll need to fill in these gaps through remedial phonics instruction. This should be done outside of the Amplify Texas block during an intervention time. We're now going to switch gears from the reading and the speaking and listening components to take a look at the writing component of the curriculum. When we think of writing, we often think of the act of putting pen to paper. However, there are many other capacities that must be developed in order for a student to be truly successful at the art of writing. The graphic on this slide allows us to examine the foundations of writing. In order to become proficient writers, students must develop their receptive and expressive language, their content and background knowledge, their ability to read complex text, and their understanding of language conventions. The Amplify Texas program is designed to teach these foundations in tandem with what students are being asked to write. The framework provides natural connections in the learning process for students as they develop as readers and writers. When examining student writing, Amplify Texas emphasizes quality, not quantity. You might notice that there are less formal writing opportunities when compared to other curriculums you may have used in the past. However, Amplify Texas takes time throughout each unit to build up those foundational skills of writing so that when a formal writing piece is completed, students can produce a high quality piece of work. Students spend time crafting a shorter piece well before increasing the length of their writing. So we've reviewed the format of the writing portions of the lessons. Let's do a quick check for understanding. Once again, let's do 1 finger if the statement is true and 2 if it is false. True or false? Writing in Amplify Texas only encompasses the plan, draft, and edit stages. False. Amplify Texas views writing with a holistic approach. Reading, discussion, learning about language conventions, those are all part of the puzzle that makes students successful writers. Amplify Texas teaches those skills along with how to plan, draft, and edit their writing to help students really become masterful writers. True or false? There are formal and informal writing opportunities throughout the units. True. Students will experience both formal and informal writing opportunities throughout the units. The informal writing opportunities are scaffolded to promote student success when they arrive at the formal writing opportunities. Let's dive into the last lesson component in Amplify Texas, language. There are 3 different skills that will be taught during the language component of a lesson: spelling, grammar, and morphology. For those of you who may not know, morphology is the study of the forms of words. So this would include things like the study of affixes and root words. Let's take a look at this component now. In grade 3, unit 1, students review all of the pieces of code that they learned in grades K to 2. And then in unit 2 of grades 3 to 5, students have a language component in most of their daily lessons. During this time, students review spelling words, practice morphology patterns, and grammar. We're going to dive into each of these segments of the language lesson in more detail. However, it is important to note that they are all connected. The spelling lists in each unit either contain a sound spelling correspondence that was learned in grades K to 2 and is being reinforced through practice with the spelling list, or they contain morphology or grammar patterns that are being learned or practiced in the unit. There are also some spelling lists that contain words related to the content being learned in the unit. These are taught by sound spelling correspondence to reinforce those previously learned sound spelling patterns. There are explicit morphology lessons in Amplify Texas. Just like the way sound spelling correspondences are taught in grades K to 2, Amplify Texas explicitly teaches affixes and root words and provides ample practice opportunities. Finally, Amplify Texas also explicitly teaches grammar. Grammar is taught and practiced, and when a grammar rule changes the spelling of a word, these can also be included on spelling lists. Let's take a closer look at spelling instruction now. Spelling assessments begin in Unit 2 of Grade 3. As we mentioned, you will encounter 3 types of spelling lists over the course of the year in Grade 3. The first one is where all the words on a list contain a particular prefix, suffix, or root word that is being studied in the unit. This list comes from Unit 2, where students are learning the ing and ed suffixes. The second type of list is where all of the words follow a particular grammar rule that will affect spelling. For example, this list of words contains words where the spelling changes when they become plural. So for these words, we do not just add an S to make them plural. The third type of spelling list you will encounter contains words that follow a particular sound spelling correspondence. For example, in this list, all of the words contain an R-controlled vowel. In grades 4 and 5, students have 2 spelling lists and 2 assessments per unit. One list and assessment will contain content-specific words that correspond to the topic of the unit. The second list will either contain more content-specific words, or it will contain words with the prefix, suffix, or roots that students have been learning in the unit. The list on the left is the first spelling list from Unit 3 of 5th grade. Early American Civilizations, Myths, Pyramids, and Kings. As you can see, the list contains words related to the topic, such as rainforest, pyramid, and empire. The list on the right is the second list from Unit 3 of 5th grade. It contains words beginning with the prefixes ill, in, and such as illegible, intercede, and irregular. Now let's take a look at how the spelling words are introduced in Amplify, Texas. When spelling words are introduced to the students, the teacher begins by identifying the pattern in the spelling words. In this case, students will be reviewing all the spellings for the S sound. First, the teacher writes the spelling words for students, and then the students identify what spelling makes the S sound in each of the words. The teacher also introduces the challenge words, one of which is a content word from the text they have been reading. In this example, it's scoundrel. Students will then use their individual code charts to determine how to sort the words by their spellings. Words that spell the S sound in the same way will go under the same column. Finally, students practice using the words in a sentence. And the class will determine if the sentence makes sense. There's also a letter in the student activity book to caregivers that reviews the spelling words for caregivers. Wonderful. Now that we've reviewed our approach to spelling, let's take a look at how Amplify Texas teaches grammar and morphology. Grammar lessons include instruction on sentence structure and punctuation, and morphology lessons include instruction on word parts and how words are formed. There are grammar and morphology lessons where the teacher explicitly teaches a grammar rule or an affix root word, and students will have the opportunity to practice. The content of these practice pages will be in line with the unit content. As you examine the spelling, grammar, and morphology lessons, you will notice connections throughout the unit. Now that we reviewed the language portion of the lesson, let's do a quick check for understanding. Let's go back to our true-false format. Hold up one finger for true and 2 fingers for false. True or false? Language instruction in Amplify Texas includes explicit instruction in spelling, grammar, and morphology. True. Amplify Texas provides explicit instruction in all areas of language instruction. Then students have the opportunity to practice. True or false? Students are given a list of spelling words at the beginning of the week and asked to memorize the list at home for the assessment at the end of the week. False. Students are explicitly introduced to these spelling words through a sound spelling analysis or completed practice activities throughout the week before they get an assessment. So remember, grammar and morphology lessons can also be connected to the spelling words. Grammar and morphology is woven throughout the unit and also assessed on the unit assessments. Wonderful. We have discussed all of the 4 main components you will see in Amplify Texas lessons. We're now going to dive into how we assess student mastery of the lesson objectives and the unit goals. Let's take a look at the different types of assessment included within the Amplify Texas curriculum. As you can see, the formative assessments are notated in blue, and the summative assessments are notated in green. Amplify Texas includes formative assessments such as observations, check for understanding, student activity book pages, and application activities. As far as summative assessments, the Amplify Texas curriculum includes unit assessments and benchmark assessments. Let's take a closer look at these ones now. There are many different places where assessments can be located throughout the curriculum. You will see some referenced in the table of contents of each particular unit. This one lists where the end of unit assessment is located. They are also highlighted in the lesson overview portion of your teacher guide under the formative assessment portion, which immediately follows what the primary focus objectives are being addressed in the lesson. Finally, you'll see them referenced within each lesson, showing the icons here: activity page, check for understanding, and exit pass. You will see these check for understandings as well as other formative assessments referenced throughout the lessons. So we've now reviewed all of our lesson components and the assessments that you would use within the Amplify Texas curriculum. We're going to spend the last portion of our session diving into the unique and optional program components. There are some unique components of Amplify Texas that you need to be aware of. You're not expected to have a full understanding of these at this time, but we just wanted you to preview the components so you're aware of them when you encounter them. Amplify Texas contains standard units like the ones we've been viewing and practicing with today. But Amplify also contains core quests in grades 3 through 5, a poetry unit in grades 4 and 5, and a contemporary fiction unit that are required. They just take a different format than the standard units we've covered today. Let's take a brief look at each of these units now. The poetry units contain 14 daily lessons, a unit assessment, and 3 pausing point days that can be used for differentiated instruction. Like other units, each lesson will require a total of 90 minutes. For many readers, adults and children alike, poetry can be challenging. Readers often find poems inaccessible, and they usually suspect a secret meaning that you can't decode just by reading the words. But in fact, poetry's reliance on symbolic and figurative language opens up rather than closes off meaning, giving readers more power of personal interpretation. So these units give students the tools and strategies to approach poetry. It trains them in using the methods and devices that poets use and equips them to read and interpret both formal and free verse poems. This unit routinely encourages and enables students to read texts closely and carefully. To accomplish that, and in recognition of the difference between poetry and other genres of writing, this unit's structure, materials, and activities differ at times from those of the other Amplified Texas units. Throughout the units, students practice close reading. They learn about many of the formal elements of poetry, and then they pair their work with practicing as poets themselves. This allows them to demonstrate their understanding and analysis of the poems through creative application and become detailed writers. This bolsters their ability to also analyze others' writing. Amplify Texas also includes unique units called quests. Quests are immersive, project-based units that really heighten your student engagement. We do this through collaboration, competition, self-expression, and unforgettable sensory experiences. Though rooted in activities that reinforce grade level skills, quests also connect learning to that creativity and sense of play. These quests are included in the daily instruction resources on the Amplified Texas Teacher Resource site. We do want you to be familiar with which units in your curriculum are quests. There's one core quest per grade. The core quests form part of your core instructional days. In third grade, students participate in a 5-day quest on the Viking Age. Throughout your session, you've seen some videos from a standard Viking Age unit. This 5-day quest is in addition to that unit. In fourth grade, students complete a quest on inventors called Eureka, the Art of Invention. In fifth grade, students complete a quest on An Introduction to Shakespeare, A Midsummer Night's Dream. In addition to those unique and required Amplified Texas units, you'll also encounter some program components. Units 1 contain a cursive writing unit. The cursive writing unit contains 14 lessons of instruction in cursive writing. The cursive activity book provides students with opportunities to work toward and achieve legible and fluid cursive penmanship. Although cursive lessons are contained in teacher guides, the lessons are not designed to be completed in the time allotted for units. Rather, the teacher should proceed at a pace that is right for their class, allowing new students of cursive to become comfortable with writing each letter or letter group before introducing new ones. Students reviewing cursive can sharpen their penmanship skills with periodic assignments from the cursive activity book. Once your students have learned all the letters, teachers are encouraged to have them practice by completing select writing assignments in cursive. So this is an additional program component that you'll have access to and can use at your discretion with your students. We'll now pause for some questions. If you have any additional questions after viewing this presentation, jot them down and you will find some information in the following slides where you may access some answers to your questions. I'll give you a minute or two to write down any outstanding questions now. Great. Thank you for joining me to talk about the Amplify Texas curriculum. I hope you found this an informative presentation. We're going to take about 5 minutes to summarize our learning. In order to synthesize all that we've learned about the Amplify Texas curriculum today, I would like you all to write an elevator speech explaining Amplify Texas to a caregiver. Please take about 2 minutes to write an elevator speech. An elevator speech typically is about 30 seconds or less that would explain the Amplify Texas curriculum to a caregiver. Be prepared to share out. Great. If you're working with others while you're watching this presentation, go ahead and share your elevator speech with someone else. If not, think about how you might use this explanation when speaking to the caregivers for your students at the beginning of your school year. Our objectives for today were to identify 2 to 3 implementation look-fors in Amplify Texas lesson videos, and also to think about Amplify Texas routines that are new to your teaching practices. Let's see how we did. Give a thumbs up if you felt we completely mastered the first objective, a sideways thumb if you think you're on your way, or a thumbs down if you don't think you mastered that objective at all. Let's move to the second objective. Thumbs up, sideways, or down. Great. We provide both technical support for assistance with amplify.com, as well as pedagogical support for assistance with how to use the curriculum. So please feel free to contact us at any time. We love to support our partners. You can use these emails if you need to resolve some questions that you had from earlier in the session. We also have a Facebook group dedicated to supporting you in your implementation of Amplify Texas in your classrooms. Here you can ask questions, advice, etc., to help you on your journey. To find that group, just search Amplify Core Knowledge Language Arts on your search bar. We would also love for you to join our Science of Reading community. We have a Facebook group that is solely devoted to exploring the science of reading, and we discuss current research and best practices for teaching students to read. We also have a podcast where we deliver the latest insights from researchers and practitioners of reading. It's a conversational approach, and each episode explores a topic related to the science of reading. Thanks for a wonderful day of learning. I hope that after today, you feel confident diving into that first week of teaching Amplify Texas. Please take a brief moment to fill out the survey at this link. And thank you so much.